Chapter 5. Chapter 5. Chapter 5. Basis of policing in Pakistan. Basis of policing in Pakistan. Basis of policing in Pakistan. As the overriding objective of police organization designed in 1861 AD was to maintain the stability of the Raj, the purpose was achieved through emulating the Irish constabulary model. Irish constabulary model by placing police under direction and control of the executive authority through the office of the district officer who acted as the agent of the colonial government. The Irish constabulary model. The Irish constabulary model. The Irish constabulary model. As Britain expanded its empire, a policing model deemed ideal for colonial rule came to be identified. The model was based principally on the experience the English had while they tried to enforce order in Ireland through Irish constabulary established under the Constabulary Acts of 1822 and 1836. As pointed out by Maubai 1990 AD, Irish constabulary sought legitimacy at Westminster rather than among the indigenous population. It was an alternative to an army of occupation with no community mandate whatsoever. On a structural level, it was highly centralized with a recognized chain of command from the individual constable through chief constable to inspector general who in turn was responsible to chief secretary and lord lieutenant. Another significant characteristic of the model was that it firmly established the principle that the constable was answerable to the chief constable rather than the law, the chief constable himself being responsible to central command, central government. Jeffries 1952 AD also notes that the Irish blueprint was considered as the ideal mechanism for solving a specific set of law and order problems. It is clear enough that from the point of view of the colonies, there was much attraction in an arrangement which provided what we should now call a paramilitary organization or gendarmerie, armed and trained to operate as an agent of the central government in a country where the population was predominantly rural, communications were poor, social conditions were largely primitive, and the resources to violence by members of the public who were against the government was not infrequent. It was natural that such a force, rather than one organized on the lines of the purely civilian and localized forces of Great Britain, should have been taken as a suitable model for adaptation to colonial conditions. The London model. The London model. The Metropolitan Police Act 1829 AD established the principles that shaped modern English policy. First, policing was to be preventive, and the primary means of policing was conspicuous patrolling by uniformed police officers. Second, command and control were to be maintained through a centralized quasi-military organizational structure. Third, police were to be patient, impersonal, and professional. Fourth, the authority of the English constable derived from three official sources: the crown, not the political party in power; the law, and the consent and cooperation of the citizenry. Finally, the oversight of the Home Secretary was to operate in such matters as establishment, administration, and disciplinary regulations, leaving the direction of policing as such in the hands of the two joint commissioners and now the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. In other words, the Secretary of State was not explicitly or implicitly given the authority to direct police operations. Policing in Britain for the past 181 years has continued to rest on these broad principles, and the Police Act guarantees the independence of the police of chief constable. In maintaining responsibility of direction and control of this force, the Act places high value on the principles that the Chief Constable should be free from the conventional processes of democratic control and influence in relation to decisions in individual cases. The Irish and British models compared. The Irish and British models compared. Using the three criteria of legitimacy, structure, and function, Mobile 1990 AD demonstrates that the English and colonial models of policing are quite distinct. In terms of legitimacy, while the English system is founded on the law and on local government accountability, an alien authority using its law to suit its purpose legitimizes the colonial model. In the colonial system, the police not infrequently usurped the role of judge, jailer, and executor. The order imposed by the police did not automatically square with the law with which it was habitually coupled. Arnold 1986,3. To a certain extent, the same can be said of the structure. While the police forces of England were decentralized, senior officers tended to be recruited from the military. The colonial system featured a military structure with personnel often drawn from the armed forces, usually and certainly in the case of senior officers. Aliens armed and living in separate quarters. The two models are also distinct in terms of their functions. While the police forces under the English system accepted responsibility for a range of non-crime tasks, their responsibilities for general administration were nowhere as important as in the colonial model. Moreover, the role of the former in maintaining order and protecting the state from political protest, while scarcely ignored, never attained the priority it had in the colonies, as Arnold 1986 AD argues within the colonial system. This distinction between political and crime control function is largely a false one. To the colonial Rhine, crime and politics were almost inseparable. Serious crime was an implicit defiance of state authority and a possible prelude to rebellion. Political resistance was either a crime or the likely occasion for it. The resources and skills developed in combating one were freely employed in defeating the other. No wonder, then, that in India, where a small occupying force imposed alien rule combining administrative, judicial, and police functions, the police organization that emerged tended to follow Irish pattern, whereas in countries like United States and Australia that remained under colonial rule but where the indigenous population was in a minority and or policing settlers was a priority. As in the British Indian cities of Calcutta, now Kolkata, Madras, now Chennai, and Mumbai, now Mumbai. Alternative policing systems similar to the English system emerged. The Napier's Police Organization. The Napier's Police Organization. The Napier Police Organization. In India, Sir Charles Napier created an Irish type police in the province of Sindh in the 1840s, and a similar system was later adopted in other provinces. The force was armed and organized on a military basis. Its location in barracks, like Irish constabulary, illustrated its sources of legitimacy, structure, and function as an organ of social control. It was not only the single man who lived in barracks, married constables and sub constables were usually accommodated in the barracks with their wives and children, partly for the protection, partly to make it more difficult for them to form the local connection which their senior officers greatly feared. Tobias, 1977 to Napier, 1851, was a great sceptic of the civil service. He thought that it was a system under which the best must misgovern as founded on false principles. He therefore decided to run his new administration not through civil servants but military officers or soldier civilians, as he called them, with far less expense and more activity. Following the paramilitary Irish constabulary model, he placed the police of the entire province under the command of a captain of police. The Napier model was based on two main principles. Firstly, that the police must be kept entirely distinct from the military in their support of the government. And secondly, the police must be an entirely independent body there to assist the civilian authorities in discharging their responsibilities for law and order, but under their own officers. Although the new police was to be employed solely on police work and was to be supervised by officers whose sole duty was to control and direct them, the system lacked logical finish. Paradoxically, the district heads of police were organizationally under the command of their provincial chief, the captain of police, while operationally each one of them was subject to orders of his respective civilian authority. In essence, the senior officers of the force were merely to be good managers of the men under their command, while the district officers, apart from their revenue and judicial functions, were tasked with the responsibility of maintaining law and order in their respective districts. The rationale for Napier's model. Napier's irrational organization was a deliberate departure from the Irish constabulary model. It was typically bizarre arrangement that shocked the theorist but which made sense in view of the aims and character of the colonial administration. Griffith, 1971. East India Company's decision on police reform. It may look quite inconceivable that the British administrators with liberal backgrounds did not believe in the principles of separation of powers. Actually, most of them did, but as pragmatists, it was their considered view that only by supplementing and not by judicially reviewing or correcting the police actions, often taken at the behest of executive authorities, could the writ of the rulers be established with maximum of vigor and ease. Some liberalization in views, however, started with the Byrd Committee's report of 1838. The committee was tasked to look into the desirability of introducing in India police reforms similar to those Peel had introduced in London in 1829 AD. After stressing that the chief cause of police inefficiency was its inadequate supervision, the committee recommended that control over police be entrusted exclusively to an officer other than the collector. An intense debate followed the Byrd report. There also came a scathing indictment of the system of the Torture Commission of 1855 AD, which concluded that revenue authorities in Madras were grossly misusing their police powers to extort revenue from the poor peasants. These developments led the directors of East India Company to examine afresh the vexed subject of police reform in India. In 1856 AD, after examining the available evidence, the directors issued orders clearly emphasizing that further organizational development of police throughout the subcontinent would proceed on the basic premise that the district magistrate would cease to have any role in the affairs of police. In line with the basic principles of a modern organization, they decided to commit the police exclusively to a European superintendent of police responsible only to his departmental hierarchy. In what may be termed as the most important policy directive of 24th September 1856 for the reorganization of police throughout British India, the directors observed that the police in India had lamentably failed in accomplishing the task for which it was established. Identifying ineffectual and irrational control of the district magistrate as one of the major causes of police failure, they directed the management of the police of each district be taken out of the hands of the magistrate and be committed to an European officer with no other duties and responsible to a general superintendent of police for the whole presidency. See Gupta, 1974, 354, 5. The Police Act of 1861. The implementation of the 1856 directive could have rid the police of many of its chronic organizational ills, but the War of Independence of 1857 completely transformed the whole liberal perspective. The clock was turned back and tightening of control over police was felt a more compelling necessity both to rein in the natives and prevent policemen from ever falling into the footsteps of freedom fighters. The historic decision regarding separating the police from the executive authorities was withdrawn, and it was strongly advocated that with the judicial and police powers concentrated in the same hands, the district officer would be more effective in keeping the junior police ranks loyal to the rulers. Under the Police Act 1861, the Inspector General of Police, as the Chief of Provincial Police, assumed specific responsibilities in the areas of police policy formulation and the line operations involved in the execution thereof. His appointment was firmly controlled by central government, although once appointed, he was to act as an advisor to the provincial government on all matters connected with the police administration of the province. In carrying out his responsibilities, the Inspector General was to be assisted by several Deputy Inspector Generals posted on a territorial basis, usually each to a group of 3 to 5 districts called a range. The Deputy Inspector General was to exercise a general supervision over the district superintendents in his range, and they were to look towards him for advice, guidance, leadership, and coordination of police work within the range. As head of the district police, a district superintendent was made responsible for all matters relating to the internal economy of the force, its management and the maintenance of its discipline, and the efficient performance of all its duties connected with the prevention, investigation, and detection of crime. The system of dual control. Under the Police Act of 1861, In addition to being under the senior police hierarchy, the district superintendent was simultaneously subjected to the operational lateral control of the district magistrate under paragraph 2 of section 4 of the act. The administration of the police throughout the local jurisdiction of the magistrate of the district shall, under the general control and direction of such a magistrate, be vested in a district superintendent and such assistant district superintendents as the provincial government shall consider necessary. The police administration at the district level was thus subjected to a dual control. All administrative, technical, financial, professional and organizational control of Inspector General through his deputies, and the lateral general control and direction of the district magistrate. Also, postings and transfers of superintendent of police and officers senior to them were the concern of the provincial government, not of the Inspector General. Because of its failure to rectify the long discovered structural defects of the Irish model and intense criticism of the Draft Police Act of 1861 started right from the day it was introduced in the Legislative Assembly. It was variously described as old wine in new bottle and a new friend with an old face. Nonetheless, the act was passed with the hope that at no distant period the police in India would be reformed on lines of similar to Peel's. Sir James Stephen, a law member of the Governor General's Council in 1870-71 and a political philosopher of the India Civil Services, however, was quick to put the whole debate about police reform in the correct perspective. After accepting that the administration of justice was not in a satisfactory state in any part of the empire, he enunciated in succinct terms: the first principle to be borne in mind is that the maintenance of the position of the district officers is absolutely essential to the maintenance of British rule in India, and that any diminution in their influence and authority over the natives would be dearly purchased even by an improvement in the administration of justice. Cited in Gupta 1979. In practice, at least in some provinces, the ground position was far worse in that the police operations were controlled and directed not merely by the district magistrate but at the sub-divisional level by his subordinate, the assistant commissioner, and at the divisional level by his superior, the commissioner. In fact, the police were impressed upon to act as the hands of the civilian authorities, thereby reducing the former to an agency of the latter and practically excluding the Inspector General and his deputies from supervision of police, not only in the sphere of law and order but also to a very large extent even from its internal administration. These retrograde steps, including in particular constant interferences with the authority of senior officers of police over the men under their command, had a crippling effect on the ill-conceived police organization, in addition to exacerbating the bitter complaints of police oppression and extortion. Griffiths 1971, apart from spoiling the discipline of the force. The Police Commission 1902 to 1903. By the beginning of 20th century, the situation became so bad that Lord Curzon, the Governor General, had to declare police reform as one of the most urgent needs of Indian administration. Accordingly, in July 1902, he appointed a commission to be presided over by Sir Andrew Fraser, Chief Commissioner of the Central Provinces, to report on the state of the police organization. The commissioners, in their report submitted in 1903 AD, recorded their emphatic view that the 1861 system had completely failed. One of the major causes of its failure, according to them, was undue interference with the police by the civilian authorities. The purpose of Police Act 1861 was not to create a system of dual control but merely to provide for a reserve of authority outside the police organization to be exercised by the district magistrate only sparingly and in very specific situations, while the day-to-day police work was to be directed and controlled solely by the senior officers of police. They said. But oddly enough, the recommendations of the Fraser Commission fell short in addressing adequately the fundamental and chronic organizational ills of police or bringing about any substantial reform. Why the British did not feel able to reform police, despite overwhelming evidence in support of reform, was largely because they wanted to ensure inbuilt subservience of police to the executive administration. Never mind that corruption, lack of professional excellence, police high handedness, and resultant police public estrangement were some of the obvious byproducts of this policy. It was also due to the fact that they were not prepared to make terms and conditions of police rank and file attractive enough. In other words, the police organization was designed not to attract better talent. In his note of dissent, the Maharaja of Darbhanga, the only Indian member of the Fraser Commission, maintained that the junction of the thief catcher with judge was surely more anomalous in theory and more mischievous in practice. The connection between the district superintendent and the magistrate needed to be severed entirely and completely because, as bedfellows, they were capable of causing incalculable harm, he emphasized. He further said that his own experience in Bengal had made him believe that it was essential to sever this connection between the police and the magistracy in the high interest of justice and fair play. Ironically, similar liberal and rational views of vision and professional wisdom were frequently expressed, but were almost always superseded by the overriding consideration of precipitating the Raj. The functioning under the guiding principles of this colonial philosophy, the police performed remarkably well in its role of an occupying force, although this role kept it miles apart from the public, and often turned it into a target of emotional abuse by those who were pitted against the British. The entire background can be summarized as under. The Police Commission set up on 17 August 1860 was required to devise a system of policing based on the consideration of increased efficiency and diminished expense. The draft act was submitted on 8 September 1860 and was promulgated as the Police Act 5 of 1861. This established the following principles of police organization. Number 1. Military police were to be eliminated and policing was to be entrusted to a civilian constabulary. Number 2. Civil police were to have their own separate administrative establishment headed by an inspector general in every province. Number 3. The inspector general was responsible to the provincial government as the superintendent was to the civilian collector. The superintendent was to supervise the village police. B. The police force in all provinces of Pakistan are almost governed by this Act of 1861. The administration of police throughout the local jurisdiction comes under the powers of the magistrate of the district. The main functions of police include: number 1. Prompt obedience and execution of all orders issued by a competent authority. Number 2. Collection and communication of intelligence data that affect the public peace. Number 3. prevention of offences and public nuisance. Number 4, detection of offenders and bringing to justice all offenders whom a policeman is legally authorized to apprehend and sufficient grounds exist. Number 5, every police officer is considered to be always on duty and may at any time be employed as a police officer in any part of the province. C. The Police Act of 1861 came into force when the imperialism was becoming a part of conservative creed. Thus, Lord Mayo wrote, "We are determined as long as the sun shines in heaven to hold India. Our national character, our commerce demands it. We have one way or another 250 millions of English capital fixed in the country." D. A police commission was set up in 1902 to criticize the Police Act 1861. It observed that it would be a sufficient safeguard of the interest of district magistrate is empowered to direct the superintendent of police to make an inquiry into the conduct of any subordinate police officer. To go further than that would be to weaken the authority of the superintendent of police and to lessen his sense of responsibility. There is no necessity for the dual control for the undue interferences of the district magistrate. It being unsound in principle, had led to practical elimination of the Deputy Inspector General and the reduction of his position to that of an inspecting and reporting officer, which had greatly impaired his usefulness. The Commission did not suggest any measure to change the aggressive and biased first attitude to policy. It visualized the constabulary as a cadre meant only for duties and mechanical nature. E. The Bumsden Report. The Bumsden Report of 1926 dealt with various aspects of police working, and in 1934 the police rules were framed. These rules overall aspects of police working in detail, and in particular matters they relate to disposition of the force, uniform inspection of police stations, arms and equipment, disciplinary procedures, investigation of crime, budget estimates, accounts, award of building contracts, posting and transfer, issuance of standing orders by various supervisory officers and traffic control. The district magistrate under the police rules of 1934 is the head of the criminal administration in the district, though no such position is conferred upon him by law, neither in the Police Act or Code of Criminal Procedure. The Chowkidari Inquiry Committee of 1938 to 1940 examined some aspects of rural policing. F. Actual figure of policing in the era appears just in the period of British rule, where the appointment of an SP for Calcutta in 1791 was a sign of understanding the policing properly. Sir Robert Peel introduced principles of policing in 1829 AD, and its effect can also be felt in the evolution of policing in Sindh. G. The great reformer in Sindh police, Sir Charles Napier, later on carried out the ideas of people-friendly police. He was the man who laid the foundation of policing in Sindh on modern lines. All later developments are continuation of the already work done by this reformer. The police was made a professional organization, proving its efficiency in prevention, reduction and control of antisocial activities. This in nutshell, during the British rule, is the trace of evolution of policing in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. This reflects a great variance in the nomenclature and powers assigned to the various incumbents of the police force and became the basis for policing in Pakistan. Thank you.